really excited to be here talking to a group that's called Beyond Agile because I think the topic that I have in many ways fits that perfectly. We're trying to go beyond Agile to sort of take the next step beyond what people have traditionally taught and trained and learned when under the heading of Agile. So what I'm talking about is reconnecting management with the self-organizing teams using the Improvement Kata. Before I do that, I want to tell you just a little bit about myself. So I've been doing technology development and delivery for a long time. I came to Lean and Agile as a manager. So like some of you here, I was helping my company. It was a company of about 100 people, and I was responsible for the delivery of products. And so we formed several Agile teams and then implemented Lean practices for Lean product development. And that was a transformational experience for me, as I'm sure it was that similar others of you have had that. And so I founded my own company about 6 years ago to work with leaders and managers to do similar things. And as I've been doing that, I've come to believe a couple of things. One is that you need to really be patient to develop capabilities over the long term, but you also need to continue to deliver in the short term while you're doing that. And that you need to change culture and to really drive improvement. It's really a behavioral change. It's not a mindset change. It's not a it's not a mental or logical change. You have to change your behavior, not other people's behavior. Everybody has to change their behavior. So I want to do just a couple of things to learn about you. How many of you here have worked with a team or teams that have sort of struggled to maintain their retrospective enthusiasm, where they sort of do retrospectives and then they kind of, right? How many have experienced Agile that succeeds at the team level but sort of doesn't succeed at the larger organization level? Okay. And how many have seen an effort to sort of come out and install something like SAFe or something else as, we're going to install Agile, and seen that not work, seen that sort of dramatically kind of flop? Okay, so some people have seen that, some people haven't. The sobering fact is that achieving change and improvement on any organizational scale is really difficult, and the success, the odds are not in anybody's favor who tries to do that. The people keep trying because if you can make those types of changes, the advantages that it gives you relative to your competition are very large, and because the people that have succeeded are succeeding in a really phenomenal way. So companies like Toyota Motor Company, have become extremely dominant by succeeding with process improvement over many, many, many years, and people want to emulate that. So people keep trying, even though it's hard, but it'd be nice to make it a little bit easier. And so one reason that it's hard is that your team is really only part of that picture. So it usually, in most organizations, takes more than just an Agile team to deliver. You really need to integrate. If you want to deliver value, you need to integrate with the rest of the organization. So what I'm going to tell you about the Improvement Kata is that if you're working at a team level, that you can use the Improvement Kata, and specifically part of that to help sort of boost or supercharge your retrospectives, to get more out of your retrospectives and kind of sustain the momentum and energy. If you're a manager, I'm going to tell you that your job change is a continuous thing that's going on, both in terms of the technology and in terms of the world around us. So really, if your job is to manage anything, it's to manage change. And if you're in a coach or internal or external coaching or consulting role, I'm going to tell you how the Improvement Kata can help you to sort of get leverage and sustain your impact after you move away from working with a group or an area or a company. So those are some of the things I have. The way I'm going to do that, I want to do a little bit more about why you need a continuous improvement pattern, what the Improvement Kata is, describe that, and then I'll show you how it works by the means of a case study. So how a company has gone through the preparation to get ready to use the Improvement Kata to connect managers and teams, the planning, the execution, steps that they follow, and then how they're sustaining that. And then we have room for Q&A, and I'm looking forward to doing a retrospective and getting your feedback at the end as well. So if you're somebody who's leading or managing change, this is not usually what things look like. You don't usually get to sort of have a bird's eye view and see all of the obstacles laid out and plan your route and enjoy glorious weather at the same time. If you're leading change, improvement, or different kinds of change, responding to whatever stimulus is driving that, it usually is more like this. So you find yourself, you're kind of shining a flashlight. You kind of know, you've kind of seen a map, you think you know where you're going, but shining a flashlight into the dark and the fog. You find obstacles, you have to back up and navigate around them. And the people that are going through the change, the people that you're trying to lead through the change, they're right there with you. It's not like you get to go out and scout ahead and then come back and be the expert. Like, you bump into stuff and they bump into you because they're right behind you. So this is more the change leader's point of view. When we talk about the Improvement Kata, the way we talk about that is the threshold of knowledge. So the point is, the metaphor is you're climbing up some stairs, and the only way to see further up the staircase at a certain point is to take a step up the staircase. And as you do that, obstacles that you didn't know were there begin to come into view, and you have to figure out what you're going to do about it. So you don't really know how many stairs there are or what obstacles lie ahead. So what keeps you moving, what keeps people moving, is that an understanding of a better place to be, a better version of the future, is really what pulls people forward. So you have this direction or challenge that you're trying to achieve, which makes you want to persevere. So the Improvement Kata is a scientific approach, and it's taken into fact that the reality of what it is like to make change and to lead change. Just like with Agile, we take an empirical approach to software product development and delivery. The same thing, the Improvement Kata does the same thing for process improvement. So you're taking, you're trying to make an experiment. You think you're going in the direction of your where you want to be. You take a step, you take a few steps, you see where you are. You might have to back up, you might have to change direction. But in the whole, overall, the empirical approach is best suited to getting where you want to be. And so what we call the place we want to be in the Improvement Kata is a target condition. So I'll tell you a little bit more about that when I link that to Retrospectives in a minute. First thing I want to do is tell you what the Improvement Kata pattern is. So it's a pretty simple, easy to remember pattern. Diana says you can remember if you have as many things as you have in your fingers. So there's 4 steps. And the first step is to understand what the challenge is, what your sort of big thing that you're trying to achieve in terms of outcomes or outputs, and also the way or the changes in your process, your business, that you hope to realize in order to achieve that. And so a challenge typically lies, depending on your skill level and what you're trying to do, maybe 6 months to a couple of years out in the future. So this is not something that you're going to reach overnight, but it's not something that you might never reach in your life. Then the next step is to look at your current condition. So that's where you are now on the relevant dimensions relative to that challenge. So you want to reach this challenge. How are you doing that process now? And then the next step is to set one of a series or successive target conditions, which are kind of these little dots here. So you're saying, maybe, depending again on your skill level, maybe a few weeks to a few months from now, where do I want to be on the way to that meeting that challenge? And then the fourth and final step is the execution. So it's those obstacles on the stairway. So you start identifying where you think your target condition is going to lead you. What obstacles do you see in your field of view? And then you start attacking those and trying to figure out how to solve your way through them. And those are the empirical steps on that staircase. So the Improvement Kata came from this guy, Mike Rother. He's a professor at the University of Michigan. And people at the University of Michigan, other people like Jeffrey Liker, they study basically Toyota. So they spend a lot of time studying Toyota, and they write books that are red and say Toyota on them. And so this is one of them. Mike Rother spent about 5 years, I think, studying Toyota, a research project for this book. And what he was really looking at, we talked about Toyota as it's not that they set out to invent lean. What they did is they had beliefs and a culture which led them over time to evolve things that we today call lean. And so what he wanted to do is understand what is that culture that produced this thing that we call lean, and how is it, what's the modern expression of it, and to kind of explain that to the rest of the world. Then the question is, how can we learn to emulate that or to implement that in other places where we want to change the culture? So that's really the thing that he's been working on, the thing that's described in the book. So it's not so much that he invented it as that he sort of revealed it as a researcher. So really what the Improvement Kata and the Coaching Kata, which I'm also going to mention, it's really the systematic pattern of working. So it's that there's the planning stages where you're understanding the direction, grasping the current condition, establishing your next target condition, and then you're iterating up that staircase. You're executing to iterate up that staircase. Target condition is kind of foundational to both the concept of the challenge as well as the target condition, really the current condition. So I'll just talk about that a little bit. So a target condition, this is called a learner's storyboard, which is one of the sort of artifacts that we use with the Improvement Kata. And it talks about the process that you're trying to install, the challenge that you have. So in this case, this is a software development team or set of teams, and their challenge is that their processes are trying to install web services into a production environment. And their challenge is that they want to have a push button install process. They want to be able to do that for any number of web services basically at will. But the things at present are not meeting that condition. So the current condition is that new services not only can they not be installed in automated fashion, they half the time they can't even be installed at all the first time. So they're pretty far from their challenge. The target condition describes then that first step that they want to reach on the way. So the first step they want to reach is that, so target conditions always have an achieve by date. And it describes the process both in terms of the outcome as well as the way that that process will be or the way that it will change. So they want to be able to do first-time deployment of web services, so they want them to succeed on the first try 90% of the time instead of 50% of the time. And they don't want that to be done by sort of step-by-step process that takes 9 days. They want the average deployment time to stay the same. They don't want to have to add additional people, so they don't want to have 10 people to do it. And they want to have a net decrease in defects. So they don't want to be introducing a lot of defects because they're rushing to try to get things into production and lowering their standards. So that's sort of an example of a target condition on the way to a larger, bigger challenge. So what we see with teams or organizations that began to use a target condition is that without a target condition, people are, you might see this in some of your Agile retrospectives, they'll sort of, the problem is our sprints are too long, so we're going to change our sprints. Wow, the problem is our sprints are too short, we're going to change our sprints. So they're sort of meandering around, or talking about the process. The problem is our WIP limits. We don't have WIP limits. That's what we need. Then we'll get those web services done. Or they're arguing over their pet solution, where if we just installed all new infrastructure, then the web services would install properly. It would be easier. Or if we just if we just paid attention to QA because no one appreciates them anyway, then we'd really we'd be where we need to be. So people are sort of arguing over what they need to do, but not really with a very close reference to actually where they're trying to go. So what a target condition really does is focus people on, okay, well, if I need to be there in 3 weeks, I'm clearly not going to get all new infrastructure. I'm not going to change the way QA people are compensated. Changing sprint lengths isn't going to help probably because that's only 3 weeks away. So what are we going to do to get there? And we better do it today. So that's really the function of a target condition sort of brought into the context of an Agile team. So Agile retrospectives are great, and there's a lot of tools to look at other stuff besides process. So you can look at we have tools and we use tools, regularly in teams to talk about, the way people interact, communication, relationships, what people's needs are relative to their work and each other, what value is, all these things. We can talk about these in retrospective. But what, the typical picture of teams doing retrospectives is something like this. So we might have a passable understanding of our current condition, and we have a lot of ideas for improvements that will make things better. But if you have this, what that often leads to is kind of, at best, a kind of shotgun approach to improvements, where we made an improvement here and then we made one over there. And initially that usually works pretty well, because there's a lot of really obvious improvements where each one kind of makes a big difference. But as you start to make more of those, that sort of obviousness and the obviousness of the benefit or outcome kind of diminishes. So if you're adding, a 1/4 inch to a lake that's got some, wind chop on it, it's really hard to tell whether the lake got any deeper or not. And that's kind of the experience, I think, why a lot of retrospectives kind of lose their efforts. Not that you're not making improvement, it's just that the improvement is imperceptible both to the people outside the team and to the people inside the team. So if we don't want to do that, what we would prefer to do, or maybe you might prefer to do, is to have a target condition where you knew a different vision of your process that you have, where you want to be in the future, so that the same number of improvement steps are actually aligning to get you somewhere. It doesn't mean that all of these things weren't potentially good directions to go, but if you do them in a serial fashion, you're able to show the benefit and the improvement much more consistently, both to the people that are making it and to the people that might be benefiting from it or needing to proceed outside the team. So, combining a retrospective and a target condition, really, the target condition helps people pull forward. And again, it's agile. We're not asking you to have a detailed step-by-step black belt Six Sigma improvement plan. We're saying, understand where you're going. And then your impediments, things that you raise in your retrospective, become issues or potential obstacles. And the question is, which obstacle are we going to address that's going to get us closer to our target condition? So if that's a way to help if you're stuck with retrospectives on your team, the other thing that we talked about at the beginning is that your team isn't the entire value stream. There's other parts in your organization. And so for a lot of problems, you need to tackle them by aligning multiple teams or multiple parts of the organization. And so this kind of depicts that pattern that you do to achieve that. So you basically would have multiple teams or multiple parts of the organization sharing a common challenge, but those individual parts of the organization would have their own target condition. And so what I want to do now is tell you about through the case study, give you an example of an organization that did this with multiple teams, common challenge feeding toward a bigger organizational problem than could be solved by one team doing retrospective. Are you with me so far? Can you still hear me back there? Okay. So we're going to talk about the preparation, the planning of the improvements, the execution, and then how the organization, some of the outcomes, and then how the organization is sustaining this. So the organization that I'm talking about is a traditional IT organization. It's not a software product company. That means that they're serving. They have things that look like software products, more in their sort of customer-facing, e-commerce, web-type side of things. But they have multiple platforms that are doing other things like more back-end business functions like human resources and finance and stuff like that. So often, some of their teams are working together on the same types of platforms or systems, and other systems just have one team. But in total, depending on funding levels and what's going on, they have between 12 and 18 Agile teams. And at the time that we began this work, they had more than 90 3-week sprints under their belt. So they had been doing sprints for 5 or 6 years in a very consistent cadence, and had developed a lot of feeding and supplying processes for those things. Everything from release management to performance reviews. Like they'd figured out the stuff like you don't have your staff meeting on the same day that the team's trying to do sprint review and stuff like that. All that stuff sort of figured out. they have a matrix management structure, by which I mean that not everybody on any individual team reports to the same manager. So some people might report to QA, and there might be specialist DDA type people that reported to a different manager than the devs on the team. And they still have sort of a legacy two-stage testing process where there are QA people embedded in the teams, but there's also a secondary testing process in some cases. So how many people have a problem like that, where you also, you can't do all the testing in your team? Okay. So, and kind of at the organizational level, they have this idea of the balanced scorecard. So everybody, well, the way that works for them is that everybody who wants to get their bonus at the full amount needs to have an improvement goal that he or she can call his own and can call a success. So everyone should be working on some kind of improvement and have it on their scorecard, and that rolls up to their manager's scorecard, and so on. So when we began working with this company, the presenting problem was that, so in one of the areas where they have multiple teams is in their customer service. So they, increasing, like every company in the world, more of that is online. So they, have all these features in the call center, but they're also delivering those directly to customers through different channels. And so they had, at this time, they had 6 teams. 4 teams were doing projects, and 2 teams were doing enhancements of different sizes. These were all kind of feeding through that system test function, right? So anybody that's done like process modeling 101 said, well, I wonder if that system test function might be a bottleneck at times. And that's kind of where they were. That they were experiencing the case where, although they had made a lot of improvements to system tests, they would still experience episodic delays, which they couldn't really understand or explain. And that demonstrably caused them to not meet their commitments. So they would get an amount of money at the beginning of the year, and they'd have to give some of it back every year for stuff that they just couldn't get done for one reason or another. So that was causing a lot of consternation for all parties involved. So basically it's a throughput problem. They wanted to get more out of their system. When we started to look at the system, so this is kind of the problem that they talked a lot about. When we started to look at the problem, it turned out, working with the managers, not going very deep, but just kind of getting people to talk to one another more, that the system test group was also serving another business group. So they were serving finance and HR sometimes. They were responsible for kind of a receipt of outsourced software for their kind of contractual agreements and what they would do when they got that. They were doing some other projects kind of on an ad hoc basis, serving other people. And then they actually were like a third level support in some cases, where they would get escalated things that they'd have to stop what they were doing to work on, to do troubleshooting, to see if it actually was a bug that the customer was reporting. So that sort of made the picture more complex and started to suggest some things that might be causing the fluctuations in throughput or output. We kind of looked at this original problem as one, I'll show you in a minute, at one sort of value stream within the larger system, and then we looked at the other main delivery value stream was this finance and HR. So those kind of the things that were impinging on this shared testing process were really these 2 value streams. So what were they doing in order to address the problem? Well, they were doing a lot of stuff. Everybody, had all kinds of improvement goals on their scorecard. They were doing all kinds of things, and whenever a project got late, then they would make all kinds of decisions to address that project. They would cancel things. They would put more staff on it. They would take staff off other things. But they were not. All these things were not linked together in terms of a coherent view of the way the system was functioning. So it was basically a lot of people knowing, like, generally we want more work to come out, and then kind of each self-organizing how to best achieve that goal, but not with a complete view to the system. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Okay. So the way we address that feeding challenge and sort of aligning things in the Improvement Kata is to align it with the existing management hierarchy. So and this is important. So in a lot of systems, the coach is somebody that you hire at the team level, or it's somebody that comes from corporate who knows about lean and they work with the people on the shop floor, whatever the case is. But in the Improvement Kata, the coaching, and we have coach-learner relationships that are basically management, sort of employee-manager relationships. So the managers are the ones who are coaching, the line managers are coaching the employees. It doesn't have to be a one-to-one. I mean, matrix organizations are complex, but generally people with higher spans of control are coaching people with more focused spans of control within that span of control. And so the pattern and the way things are ordered and aligned in that organization is that the target condition that the director establishes is really becomes the challenge for the manager one level down. So people with a higher span of control set bigger target conditions at a higher level of abstraction, and there are fewer of them. So the director in this case might only have one or two target conditions or challenges that he's setting out for his department. The manager, each manager might have a couple or three, and then the manager would have, in many cases, Scrum Master working on, or somebody else on a team or around a process working on smaller things for him. And so that's the way that the coaching, the planning and the coaching aligns within the improvement plan.
Do you feel at all like the the team members or the people being taught might have felt that there was relevance issues, or I mean, sometimes like it almost feels like top down, like here's what we're telling you need to improve on. Versus,
well, let's hold that thought and see if we answer it. I mean, I definitely want to come back to it, so let's come back to it a little bit toward the end. I guess you could turn that around. It's like if you have a coach that comes to coach your Scrum team, do you think that the team always knows what's relevant? I guess that's the way I would answer that for now, but we can come back and talk about the individual experience. So there's this relationship, this coaching relationship, and one thing to point out before we go on from this slide is that from what Mike Rother says, Toyota has a role that's very similar to the Scrum Master in the sense that there's somebody who's close to the work, who's kind of like on the line, close to the work that's being done, who has spare cycles to do process improvement. That's really what a Scrum Master is if you kind of abstract it out. And so Toyota has that role, and the reason that they're able to run really lean in the processes and the way they staff things is because they have that role. Somebody looks for root causes and addresses them and keeps the flow stable at before those problems compound and get out of hand. So I think Scrum Masters are well suited to be kind of the fulcrum for an Improvement Kata implementation, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that.
What's PDCA iteration?
Sure. PDCA, should take acronyms out. Plan, Do, Check, Act is a very common acronym in most types of lean, and so most of the people Mike Rother works with are like lean manufacturing, so that's kind of where they get it. So we're going to talk about PDCA a couple of times. It's Plan, Do, Check, Act. It's that continuous improvement cycle in, the other, DMAIC is the other way they call it, Define, Manage, Analyze, Implement, Control. There's another similar cycle. We have things like that in Retrospectives too. So in this organization, the main players I'm going to show you, the names have been changed to protect the innocent, but department manager is David. David has some value stream learners, Brian, Susan, and Nitin. And then there's process level learners, Sean, Amy, Igor, Vanessa, and Chandra. And they're sort of color-coded, which makes sense in a second. So the Susan and Brian are responsible respectively for those finance and HR value stream and that customer service value stream. So they have planning, development, and system test for their value stream. But we saw that there's that shared process, and so Nitin is the QA manager, responsible for the managers on the team as well as that shared process, that second stage process. But in a process capacity, he's really managing that second stage process and owning that process. So the Improvement Kata, what it teaches you, or what you're implementing, is not like some new stuff that you do. Just like with Agile, you're not still hopefully doing all of the project management activities that you used to also do. If you do, then it's frustrating and costs a lot and doesn't really get you what you want. So with the Improvement Kata, you need to find a way to use replace many of your existing management systems and practices and behaviors over time with new practices and behaviors that replace the old ones, that are an alternative way of doing those things. So it's a new approach to management. And it's change led by management. So the way that we did this, we started with management. We did a value stream mapping workshop. We did that system map that I showed you and more detailed value stream mapping to kind of figure this all out. There was different things that we tried, and it didn't all just magically appear. There's some figuring out. We provided lean training for coaches who are the managers, and then we formed something called an advanced group, which is really the people that are going to be doing this first. So we didn't put all of the managers in the department on this. We had this challenge that we wanted to solve. We figured out a set of people that were going to work on that challenge, and we made them a group, like you would have a pilot in an Agile implementation. They're the group that was going to try this out first, figure out how it works, learn the practices and concepts, and then spread that new way of management to the organization. So that's the role of the advanced group. And the first thing the advanced group does, once we've figured them out, is to begin daily practice as process learners. So that means that the director in the organization is down working on a very small process improvement that involves two or three people and is making daily improvements. It's very technical. We're trying to figure out, can we automate deployment to this new area so that this sort of set of processes can be more rapid and more fully streamlined. So very hands-on for somebody who hasn't really been in that kind of a role for a long time. And what that let him do after about 6 weeks or so of doing all this value stream figuring and advanced group forming and stuff is to feel confident to get up in front of his entire staff and sort of model that coaching kata and say, like, I want you to do this every day, and I've been doing it every day for over a month, and here's what I've learned, and here's what's still hard for me. When we reached that point, we had kind of queued up, we were ready to begin a training program, and the idea of the training program is for the learners. So what we wanted to do was on all those teams that were affected within the span of where we are now and where we want to go with the Improvement Kata, we're teaching those people about lean principles like work in progress, a little bit of value stream mapping, understanding the principles of flow, but really starting with you're going to be a learner and you're going to need to apply these as a learner so that wherever the process improvement need trail sort of led to with the managers acting as coaches, they would be able to find a suitable learner on a suitable team or process who had the knowledge and expertise to really dig in and work at that process level. So when you're planning improvement, that's sort of this part on the left. There's still a coach relationship. The same coach relationship is there. You're sort of working iteratively to understand the direction, grasp the current condition, establish the next current condition. And so for our group, for our main players here, that's what this sort of looks like. So David defines a challenge for his value stream owners. He says, I want to have higher throughput in this this customer service process where we've had so many problems by Thanksgiving. And there's more definition to that, but that's the essence of his challenge. So then Brian is the learner on that value stream. He discusses the direction with the coach. He's analyzing the current state and then designing a target condition that he believes is on the way to that challenge. And his two peers are doing the same thing with the same coach at the same time, but their target conditions may be different. If they are different, and if they're incompatible, or if they're overlapping and they should be knowing about each other, then the coach, his job is to tell them. So they don't have to all collaborate every day, but the coach has to be aware of what everybody's doing to help be a traffic controller. So Brian says, a strategic objective to increase throughput. In order to achieve that, we need to complete enhancements faster, according to my analysis. I'll have a target condition to deliver enhancements faster. So, through that conversation, he sets the target condition. And then Brian and his learner agree on the elements, the outcome metrics and process metrics for that target condition. and they talk about the known obstacles. So they come up with kind of a parking lot list of obstacles, and then the coach is going to ask, well, which of those obstacles are you working on first? Meanwhile, Brian is working with his learner, and his learner is Amy, and she says she's looking for opportunities. How can she meet that target condition that's been given to her? Well, she says the average enhancement spends 6 days in the queue for a release. So we have a 2-week sprint, and then the average thing waits for 6 days. We think we can make that shorter. So they begin these cycles executing using the coaching kata in these daily improvement cycles. So I'm going to stop there for a minute before we explain the coaching kata and ask you just to do this experiment. Some of you are already doing it, but if you're not, just fold your arms. So, okay. Now, think about that. Now fold your arms the other way. So if you have one hand on top, put that underneath and kind of do it that way. So that's harder to do it the other way, right? Because you have muscle memory. You have a way that you've done that since you were in, preschool, and that's the way you do it. So let me ask you this: if your team's jobs all depended on being able to fold their arms the other way, where they're going against their muscle memory, would you have the CIO give them a talking to and say it's really important that you fold your arms the other way, or would you have breaks every hour and practice folding the arms the other way until it got easier, right? So if you want to learn a simple behavior, a new simple behavior, simple, everybody kind of knows that the way to do that is to practice it, and it's going to get easier, But strangely, we don't necessarily build that up when we try to do large-scale behavior change. We often start with the, CIO needs to tell you this is important, and that ought to get you motivated. So kata is really just a word. I don't know what it translates to in Japanese exactly, but it's a practice pattern. It's an improvement pattern. So things like chord transitions that you might do if you're learning to play the guitar, or little parts of a dance that you're trying to learn if you're trying to learn trying to learn the tango or something. These are can be considered, for our purposes, kata. With the improvement kata, we do these daily coaching meetings, and so there is a practice pattern for the daily coaching meetings. And what makes that powerful is kind of the same thing that makes some aspects of Agile or Scrum powerful. If you know that, okay, we're going to answer the same questions today. We're going to answer the same 3 questions. What are they again? It's like, what did I do? What am I going to do? Okay, but when you get those questions asked of you, you don't forget the questions. You're answering the same questions every day. It becomes easier to think about, well, what are the impediments? What am I doing? As easy as easy as it seems. Like a lot of times, the first time you ask those questions, people forget to say all the things that they're actually doing that day. But you get better at it because you can think about the content, because the structure of the questions is always the same. So that's what the coaching meetings do. So you start with, again, PDCA, Plan, Do, Check, Act. Cycles record is just, this is a written log of all of the improvement steps you make on the way to your target condition. So it's kind of like your laboratory notebook. So each row is an experiment. So you talk about what do we expect, when we do this experiment or try this improvement, what happened when we did it, what did we learn from that, and what are we going to do next. So those are the basic steps you're going through for each improvement on that staircase. And the 5 questions are, they print them out on these wallet-sized cards. What is the target condition? So remembering, where are we trying to be in 3 weeks to a couple of months? What's the actual or current condition now? Where are we today? Not where did we start, but where are we today? What obstacles do you think are preventing you from reaching that target condition? So you've got this parking lot list of all the things that are on your mind. And what is the one of those obstacles that you're trying to address? And what are you going to do? What's the next step that you're going to do to address that obstacle? And then the 5th question, the 5 questions, is when can we go back and see the result of that? And the design is, it should be tomorrow, or it should be in a couple of days. It shouldn't be, A lot of times when people start, it's hard, but it shouldn't be 2 weeks from now. It should be in the next day or two. So you ask these 5 questions, and you use the cycles record at every step on that staircase. So in our example, Brian says, well, what is your target condition? And Amy says, my target condition is that enhancement stories spend less time in the queue for release. So we have a number for that. Brian asks, well, what obstacle are you working on? And Amy says that we need, one of the things that's preventing us from releasing sooner is that we have to take the IVR system, the voice response system, down in order to do releases. And when we do that, we have to do it during off hours so it doesn't affect people that are on the phone or in the queue. And when we need to do things off hours, we have to schedule an operations person, and those people aren't staffed to do that, so they can only come in periodically once every week or two to do these types of releases. So Brian says, so that's the obstacle, what's the next step? And Amy says we're going to try to plan using the scheduling system to bring that down. So we're going to run a pilot to see if we can bring the IVR system down using a script, and once that gets approved, then we'll be able to release any night that is approved for a release. We're no longer dependent on that operations person to be scheduled to come in at night to do our release. So Brian says, that's a good idea. When can we go see the next step? And then Amy has an answer for that. So those are the 5 questions, the 5 coaching questions. This is the execution part. It's the daily part. And it's the part that really makes that simple improvement kind of pattern work at an organization scale. So in our case study, we had some interesting outcomes, exciting outcomes, sort of helping move this organization forward against the problem that they're trying to achieve. One lesson or outcome was that we found that some user stories can take a simpler path. So just because there was a second stage testing process, people were sending everything through the second stage testing process, and it turned out that upon examination or with some redesign of some of the work or some simple acceptance criteria changes, many things didn't actually need to go through the second stage testing process. They could be completely tested within the sprint, and they could be released at will, basically. But everything didn't have to follow the same path. The second thing, Donald Reinertson says, watch the baton, not the runner. So teams had a lot of metrics that were focused on how things were going in their team and how they might be compared to other teams in terms of, what's our velocity, how predictable are we. But as we saw in that example earlier, when people get to the boundary of their team where it's done, our product owner accepted it, it's taking 6 days to be released. They weren't really focusing on that or paying attention to that. And so with this use of value stream mapping by the managers, they spent quite a bit of time going back and forth agreeing on sort of standard color-coded states that they could use across their teams. It got everybody focused on those cues that were between work process steps. And so it turned out, in that example I gave, it's not a big surprise that if you had a 3-week sprint and you were doing 10 stories in your sprint, what are the odds you're going to take 6 days off of every story on average, by changes that you do alone in your team without adding staff, right? That's a pretty hard bar to set, but there's all this sort of low-hanging fruit. If we can just get things released faster, our cycle time is going to change by the same amount. So it's a lot cheaper to make those changes in these queues than it is within the process that we work so hard to build and maintain. A third thing that the organization learned is that one size doesn't fit all. So again, with that balanced scorecard approach, the de facto kind of path to successful process improvement and being sort of looked at as a paragon of improvement was you come up with an improvement. So you come up often with a problem or maybe just with a countermeasure that is a best practice that you discovered at a conference somewhere. And you come back and you get attention to your problem and you get resources to do a pilot and you show the benefit of that pilot wherever you tested it, probably in a place where you thought you were going to get a lot of benefit, if you're smart. And then you prove that benefit and how great it is, then you extrapolate to the rest of the organization, and then you make everybody else adopt your process improvement. So that was, in fact, the way that process improvement was looked upon. It wasn't explained in such stark terms, but that's basically what was going on in those cases. So the thing that the organization learned is that what makes sense in one process in one place may be a good practice, and it might make sense, but maybe not at the same priority order, or maybe not at all everywhere else in the organization. So that it's good to have process improvement, but that should be really driven from the bottom up, people closest to the work, rather than imposed uniformly across the organization. At least if you're trying to get benefits of the kind that we're talking about. We developed this thing called the success card, which is basically, this one is kind of describing that one that I talked about earlier, decreasing the size of the release queue for that enhancements team. And so this basically talks about the part that the learner fills out, the part that the coach fills out. So they would kind of describe this on an index card or a large sticky note, and then post them prominently on the wall with a little bit of ceremony. So the point is, one of the things the organization wanted to do is be able to recognize achievements of the right type, reward the right types of behavior, and we're saying this is the right type of behavior. So what that looked like, and the way it kind of is powerful visually, is that you don't look at the throughput at that value stream level. It's not the top down, the improvements that the coach or the department head is defining. That's not, or you're going to get a bunch of consultants in from Accenture and they analyze your process and they're heroes and they tell you how to fix it and how stupid you are. That's not what's going on here. What's going on here is you're setting a challenge here. People are adapting to that challenge at more local levels, and the improvements are building up. So when you look at those success cards, if you do like a time lapse, what happens over time is that those improvements build up across the organization, and so it's not like poof, like we raise the water level. It's like, whoa, little driblets of water are coming in, and lo, our boat is floating. That's really what's going on. So the role of a coach in this, in whatever capacity, and there's a question people are going to ask, so I'll just answer it in a second. But the role of the coach is really to keep you, said at the beginning that I believe you need to keep making, need to keep delivering results in the short term while you're making longer term capability improvements. So what the role of the coach is really to keep you in a zone where you're within the parameters of quality and safety. You're not damaging your product or your customers or your reputation by experimenting irresponsibly in your processes. And you're not going out of business either. So you're within budget limits, you're within quality and safety parameters, but you're still able to experiment within a zone and within your zone of learning, so you keep learning. So that's really the role of the coach, is to keep you in that zone. It's fairly easy to learn the Improvement Kata. You could probably figure out the process with a coach or with like a few days of coaching. You go to a class and have a few days of coaching, kind of the way you could learn Scrum by going to a class and having a few days of coaching. But to really get good at software development, you don't just take somebody off the street and send them to Scrum Master School. It's the same thing. To be really good at process improvement, that takes a long time. There's no shortcut to being a good process improvement person. What the Improvement Kata does is give you a lot of opportunity to practice. And there's a lot of evidence that we get better when we practice things a lot, whether that's folding your arms or whether that's much more complex things that are really built up from small practices that are like folding your arms. So if you practice that entire pattern of behavior, you get better at process improvement. And if you have a coach that knows about process improvement, that really helps. So the question that people always ask is, well, who's the coach for the director, right? There's got to be somebody at the top who's the coach for them. And that's where the second coach, we call a second coach, comes in. This is the outside sort of process improvement expert who's familiar with the business domain and is able to work sort of one-on-one with that leader. But the difference is we're not in a situation where, well, our people are too busy to help each other, so we need to hire 5 more Scrum coaches to help all the teams, because no way, like, someone on this team could help someone on that team. You're in this place where, you have a coach who can help the person at the top of the stream and maybe some people at the next layer down. But as you get down toward those leads where you have more and more people, you're more and more able to do for yourselves, over time. So the limiter is really coaching and that ability to do process improvement. which if you think about it, that actually is your limiter no matter what. It's just making that really explicit, that being able to align things and being able to make the process improvements and help other people make the process improvement is what limits you. So the last thing is about sustaining, and we talk about sustaining improvement kata in the advanced group. It doesn't just happen by itself. So we have this new approaches to management behavior, but invariably, even if you're having success and you're seeing those success cards go up on the wall, crises occur, things happen, and people revert to their old habits just like they do, when they're learning to do Agile. Like, oh my God, we had a production problem, everybody abandoned ship and start running around. Same thing happens. So you have to, the role of the advanced group, beyond sort of the initial learning and creating that initial group and starting to grow the coaches, is to kind of keep addressing, keep sort of pushing over that hump until those management behaviors that are new kind of become second natures and the other ones kind of wither away. So that's really the way that things are sustained, is by continuing that advanced group. But again, the advanced group, they're for the most part insiders, so it's not like an outside, you're not dependent on outsiders to make your change happen. So in conclusion, I want to say that we talked about how to combine retrospectives and improvement kata using target condition to maybe find a new way to reinvigorate your retrospectives. Talked about, if you're a manager, your job is to manage change, which is continuous. And so you can use the improvement kata to help create that sustainable competitive advantage that comes from being able to learn and adapt as an organization. And then if you're an outside coach or consultant, or an inside coach and consultant, you can use the improvement kata to sustain improvement and leverage process expertise that you have, or that some expert that you bring in has, to kind of spread that through your organization to maximum effect. So I think that it's possible to step beyond Agile with the improvement kata. And I would love to hear your questions and what you think. And if you